When 67-year-old widow Dorothy Hargrove sat down at her own birthday dinner, a dinner her son insisted on organizing, the last thing she expected was to find a printed, guest menu that listed her as Mom, the generous sponsor of this evening. What she thought was a loving gesture turned out to be a humiliating performance designed to impress her son's wealthy friends. But what Dorothy's son Gerald and his wife Sylvia didn't know was that her late husband, Warren, had quietly worked with their estate attorney to add a private clause to his will, one that had been waiting, sealed in an envelope, for exactly this kind of moment. As Dorothy begins to see her family for who they truly are, the constant borrowing, the pressure to sell her home, the whispered conversations about managing her affairs, she must decide how much she's willing to endure before finally choosing herself. This is a story about dignity, betrayal, and the unexpected strength that can come from losing everything you thought you knew about the people you loved most. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, this one is for you. Subscribe and turn on notifications. New stories every week. Full story script. I want to tell you something before I start. The night I'm about to describe, the night of my 67th birthday, was the night I stopped being the woman who apologized for existing and started being the woman my husband always believed I was. I just wish it hadn't taken a printed menu to get me there. Before I get into it, if you're new here, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Stories like mine take courage to tell, and knowing you're out there listening makes every word worth it. Now let me take you back to that evening. My name is Dorothy Hargrove. I live in a 4-bedroom colonial in Asheville, North Carolina. The house Warren and I bought in 1987 when the neighborhood was still considered a stretch for a young couple on a teacher's salary and a small landscaping business. Warren built that business into something real over the next 3 decades. By the time he passed pancreatic cancer, 18 months from diagnosis to the end, he had built something much larger than either of us had ever fully appreciated. That was 2.5 years ago, and for 26 of the 28 months since his funeral, I had been slowly, quietly handing my life over to my son. Gerald is 51. He's tall like his father but without the warmth that made Warren a man people wanted to be around. Gerald has what I can only describe as a gift for making generosity feel like an obligation. An obligation feel like your own idea. His wife Sylvia is the same way, elegant on the surface, calculating underneath, the kind of woman who can say something genuinely cruel and make you feel like you misheard her. My daughter, Carol, is different. She lives in Portland, Oregon, with her husband and 2 kids, and I don't see her often enough. She'd offered to fly out for my birthday, but Gerald had already assured her he had it handled. Mom needs a local celebration. Carol, you can visit in the spring. So Carol sent flowers and called me that morning, and I told her everything was fine. I believed it when I said it. The birthday dinner was Gerald's idea. He texted me 3 weeks out, "Mom, we want to do something special for your 67th. Nothing fancy, just family and a few close friends. Let us handle everything. You deserve to be pampered." I had teared up reading it. After months of feeling like a transaction rather than a mother, the gesture felt like grace. I spent the afternoon getting ready. I wore the deep green dress I'd bought in Charleston the previous spring, the one that Warren had never seen but that I'd bought thinking he would have loved it. I wore the pearl earrings he gave me for our 30th anniversary. I took my time with my hair, with my lipstick, with the small rituals that remind me I'm still someone worth the effort. I arrived at the Pinnacle Room, a private dining space on the top floor of the Grove Park Hotel, at 6:15. Gerald and Sylvia were already there with a handful of their friends. And I do mean their friends. Of the 16 people seated around the long table, I recognized only 4. My neighbor June, my cousin Harold and his wife, and my grandson Tyler, Gerald's 19-year-old son, who was home from his first year of college. The others were business associates of Gerald's, people I had met once or twice at their parties, people whose names I had to be quietly reminded of as Gerald steered me around the room doing introductions. "This is my mother, Dorothy," he kept saying. his hand at my elbow. "She's the reason we're all here tonight." I smiled. I nodded. I thought that sounded sweet. It was when I sat down and found the menu card at my place setting that I understood what he'd actually meant. The menu was beautiful, cream cardstock, gold script, printed professionally. The table setting included a personalized card at each seat identifying the guest. I glanced at the card to my left. Harold Finch. Cousin. To my right. Diane Mercer. Gerald's colleague. Mine read, Dorothy Hargrove, Mom. Generous sponsor of this evening. I read it twice. Then I set it face down on the table. My hands were steady. That surprised me. Inside, something cold had dropped through my chest. But my hands stayed perfectly still, resting on the tablecloth, and I made my face do nothing it wasn't told to do. I looked up and caught Tyler watching me from the far end of the table. He had seen me pick up the card. He looked immediately down at his own menu. And I saw his jaw tighten. That particular tightening that young men do when they're embarrassed by something but don't know what to do about it. I recognized it because it was the same thing Warren used to do. I left the card face down and accepted the glass of wine someone offered me. And I told myself, watch. Just watch. See who they are tonight. You can fall apart tomorrow. Tonight, you watch. Gerald gave a toast halfway through the appetizers. He was good at toasts, warm, funny, the right amount of self-deprecating humor. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about what a remarkable woman his mother was. He said, "She has always believed that taking care of the people you love is the highest calling." And honestly, none of us would be sitting here in this beautiful room if it weren't for her extraordinary generosity. There was laughter. There was applause. Several of his colleagues raised their glasses in my direction with the benevolent smiles of people being entertained. I smiled back. "After all," Gerald continued, leaning into it, "who do you think paid for the appetizers?" More laughter. Louder this time. I had not agreed to pay for this dinner. I kept the smile on my face. I took a sip of my wine. I thought about Warren, the way he used to say, "Dorothy, you see things clearly. You've always seen things more clearly than you give yourself credit for." I thought about how, after he died, that clarity had gotten buried under grief and loneliness and a desperate need to believe that my family was still whole. Across the table, Tyler had stopped eating. He was staring at his father with an expression I'd never seen on him before, something between recognition and shame. After the main course, I excused myself to use the restroom. I was standing at the sink, running cold water over my wrists the way I used to when the Georgia summers got too much. When the door opened and Tyler slipped in. "Grandma," he said, "I'm sorry. I should have told you. I didn't know exactly what was on the place cards until we got here. But I knew something wasn't right. Dad's been bragging to his friends for weeks that he was throwing you a big birthday party." He never mentioned. Tyler stopped. His voice was tight. "That I'd be listed as the sponsor?" I finished for him. He looked miserable. I would have said something. I should have said something out there. I dried my hands. "How long has your father been talking about my finances with his colleagues?" Tyler hesitated. "Tyler, please." He exhaled. "Since Grandpa died, pretty much. He talks about it like you're sitting on a fortune that's just waiting to be useful to the family. He says you're not." He stopped again. "Say it." "He says you're not really equipped to manage what Grandpa left, and that it would make more sense for someone with better financial instincts to oversee things." Tyler met my eyes. I always thought he was wrong. I reached up and touched my grandson's face the way I had when he was small. "You're more like your grandfather than you know," I said. "Now go back out there and be yourself. That's all I need from you tonight." I returned to the table composed and clear. By the time dessert arrived, a 3-tiered cake that Gerald had ordered, which I could only assume I was also financing, Sylvia was holding court at the end nearest to Gerald's business colleagues, telling a story about a renovation they were planning for their lake house. A renovation, I realized with the cold lucidity of someone who had finally cleaned their glasses. That would no doubt involve a phone call to me sometime in the next few weeks. I thought about the money. I hadn't let myself add it up before. It had felt ungrateful, somehow, to track the gifts I'd given my own son. But sitting in that room with my name listed as the evening's financial backer, I let myself remember. 18 months after Warren's funeral, Gerald and Sylvia had come to me about the lake house, not the renovation. The purchase. They'd found a property on Lake Lure and it was, according to Gerald, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They were a little short. Just a bridge loan, Mom. Until Gerald's bonus came through. I'd written a check for $60. The bonus, when it came, had apparently been needed elsewhere. Then Tyler's tuition. I hadn't minded that. Actually, except that Gerald had also requested I cover the apartment Tyler chose near campus. The one that cost twice what a standard dormitory would have. And the car, because Tyler couldn't manage without reliable transportation in a city with excellent public transit. 2 new HVAC systems for Gerald and Sylvia's house. A kitchen remodel. A trip to Portugal that I had been invited on and then quietly uninvited from when the travel dates were adjusted. The trip, I later learned from Carol, had taken place exactly as originally scheduled. Carol, if she knew the full picture, she would be on the first flight from Portland. I made a decision, sitting there over untouched birthday cake in the most beautiful private dining room in Asheville. I was going to find out exactly what Warren had left me. Not what Gerald had summarized for me in the gentle, vague way he always did when I asked questions. The real accounting, with our estate attorney, Paul Whitmore, who had been Warren's friend since law school and who had, I suddenly recalled, called me twice in the past year. Calls I had returned and found myself quickly reassured by Gerald that Paul was just doing routine check-ins and there was nothing I needed to worry about. What had Paul been trying to tell me? The dinner ended with toasts and photographs and Gerald's friends telling me what a wonderful son I must have raised. I thanked everyone graciously. I hugged Tyler longer than usual. I accepted the ride home from June, my neighbor, on the excuse that I'd had one more glass of wine than I intended. In June's car, I finally let my composure soften, just enough. June had known Warren and me since before the children were born. She reached over and patted my hand without asking any questions. And I was grateful for the grace of someone who already understood. The next morning, I called Paul Whitmore's office at 8 a.m. and left a message asking for an appointment as soon as possible. His assistant called back within the hour. Paul could see me Thursday. Thursday was 4 days away. In those 4 days, I did something I hadn't done in over 2 years. I sat down with the accordion file of financial documents I kept in the hall closet, the original documents from Warren's estate that I had signed and filed and largely trusted Gerald to explain to me, and I read them. Every page. It took me all of Thursday morning. By the time I drove to Paul's office that afternoon, I had 3 pages of handwritten questions and a quiet fury that had nowhere to go yet. Paul Whitmore is a man of 73 who moves slowly and thinks fast. He greeted me in the lobby himself, which told me he understood the weight of this visit. We sat in his corner office with its view of the mountains and he folded his hands on his desk and looked at me steadily. "I've been waiting for this appointment for about 18 months, he said. I placed the handwritten pages on his desk. "Tell me everything." What followed was one of the most clarifying hours of my adult life. Warren had been, as I knew, careful with money. What I had not understood was the full scope of careful. Multiple investment accounts. A commercial property in downtown Asheville that he'd quietly purchased during the 2009 recession and held. A life insurance policy considerably larger than I'd been aware of. The total estate, Paul explained, was approximately 4 times what Gerald had led me to believe. "He's been giving you summaries?" Paul asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Yes. Summaries that understated the total by significantly." Paul nodded slowly. "I need to tell you something, Dorothy, something Warren asked me to hold until I believed the right moment had come." He opened a drawer and removed an envelope. It was sealed. My name was on the front in Warren's handwriting, the same careful, slanted script I had loved for 43 years. My hands were less steady now. He added a codicil to his will approximately 6 months before he passed. Paul said. He was very clear about when it should be disclosed. He said, and I'm quoting here, Paul, you'll know when Dorothy needs to see this. When the people around her start treating her like a resource instead of a person. Don't let it go too long, I opened the envelope. The legal language was dense. But Paul walked me through it. The essence was this. Any family member who made Dorothy Hargrove a subject of public financial humiliation. Who attempted to control or misrepresent her assets without her explicit consent. Or who took actions designed to diminish her autonomy or remove her from her home against her wishes. Would forfeit their entire inheritance from Warren's estate. Warren had specified that Paul was to document any such incidents brought to his attention. Has Gerald contacted you directly? I asked when I could speak again. Paul hesitated with the particular hesitation of a man weighing professional discretion against human decency. Gerald asked me, approximately 8 months ago, for information about your estate on the grounds that you had authorized him to manage certain financial matters. He provided a document to that effect. A document I signed? A document bearing your signature. I thought back over the past year. The papers Gerald had occasionally asked me to sign, insurance updates. He'd said, revised beneficiary forms, routine estate maintenance. I'd like to see that document, I said quietly. Paul slid it across the desk. I read it carefully. It was a limited power of attorney, granting Gerald authority over several of my secondary accounts. My signature was at the bottom. I remembered signing something in Gerald's kitchen. He'd handed me a pen. Explained it was an update to an old form. Kept talking while I signed. I hadn't read it. Is this enforceable? I asked. In its current form, yes, but if it can be demonstrated that the signature was obtained through misrepresentation. Paul stopped. He looked at me. Dorothy, what would you like to do? I sat for a moment looking at the mountains through his window. I thought about the menu card. I thought about Tyler's face. I thought about Carol in Portland who didn't know what was happening to her mother. I'd like to revoke this document, I said, today, and then I'd like to understand exactly what Warren wanted done with what he built. And I'd like to make sure that it's done that way. Of course. And Paul, I need a little time before any of this comes to light. I need to see what Gerald and Sylvia do next. Whether they reveal more of themselves. Can we keep this between us for now? Paul leaned back in his chair. Warren also anticipated that you might say something like that. He said. He left a note. Just a short one. He slid a smaller envelope across the desk. Inside, in Warren's handwriting, were 4 sentences. Dorothy, you always did know when to be patient. Take whatever time you need. I'm not going anywhere. I cried in my car for 11 minutes. Then I drove home, changed into my garden clothes, and spent the rest of the afternoon pulling weeds. The garden had been one of the first casualties. In the months after Warren died, when Gerald and Sylvia had started coming by regularly, always with a reason. Always circling back to finances, I'd stopped keeping up with it. Too tired, too distracted, too busy trying to hold the shape of a family that was quietly hollowing itself out. But that afternoon I worked until my knees ached. And when I came inside, the back beds looked better than they had in 2 years. I called Carol that night. I told her everything. There was a long silence on her end. Then, Mom, I'm booking a flight. Not yet, I said. I need a little more time. But I want you to know. And I want you to come for Thanksgiving. I'll be there. Her voice was shaking. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have been paying closer attention. You trusted your brother. So did I. What are you going to do? Watch, I said, for a little while longer. Gerald called the following Tuesday. His tone the warm, solicitous version he used when he wanted something. He said he hoped I'd enjoyed the birthday dinner. He said the room had looked beautiful and several of his colleagues had pulled him aside to tell him what a remarkable woman his mother was. I thanked him. I kept my voice even. Then he said, Mom, there's something I've been meaning to bring up. Sylvia and I have been talking. And honestly, this house, it's a lot for one person. We're not saying anything needs to happen immediately. But with the market being what it is right now, we think it might be worth having someone come through and give us an assessment. Just so you have the information. That's interesting, I said. Are you thinking of buying it? There was a pause. No, we'd want you to find something more suitable. Something you could maintain more easily. We actually looked at that new community out on Biltmore Avenue. The one with the shuttles and the bingo nights? He laughed, but it had a forced quality. They prefer the term, active senior living. It's actually very nice. We took a tour on your behalf. Asterisk on my behalf. He had toured a senior living community on my behalf without telling me. Without asking me, and was now presenting it as thoughtfulness. Gerald, I said, I love this house. Warren and I built this house together. I'm not moving. Mom, be reasonable. I'm being extremely reasonable. I'm staying in my home. I'm managing my own affairs. And from this point forward, I'd appreciate it if you'd consult me before making plans that involve my life. Another pause. Longer this time. You've been talking to someone, he said, and the warmth had drained out of his voice completely. I've been talking to myself, I said, for the first time in a long while. Goodbye, Gerald. Thanksgiving arrived along with Carol, her husband Dennis, and my 2 grandchildren from Portland, 13-year-old Iris and 10-year-old Sam, who both called me Grandma. And had the enviable habit of climbing on me like furniture whenever they could get away with it. Tyler drove over from campus, arriving early to help me set the table. Gerald and Sylvia came last, walking in with a bottle of expensive wine and expressions that mixed uncertainty with determination in a way I was coming to recognize. The dinner was lovely. Carol and I had cooked together all morning. Tyler and Dennis had handled the pies. Iris and Sam had made place cards in careful crayon lettering. And my card read, Grandma. The best. I put mine in my pocket to keep. It was over coffee and dessert that Gerald made his move. He did it with the confidence of a man who had been planning and who believed the planning had gone well. He cleared his throat, glanced at Sylvia, and addressed the table with an expression of practiced concern. I want to talk about something I've been carrying for a while. And I hope everyone will hear me out. Because this comes from a place of love. He looked at me. Mom, we're worried about you. Since Dad died, you've been managing a significant amount of complexity on your own. And honestly, we don't think it's fair to you. Sylvia and I would like to formalize an arrangement where we take on some of the financial management. Just to reduce your burden. What kind of arrangement? Carol asked, her voice controlled. A financial power of attorney. Sylvia said smoothly, just a practical measure. Many people find it a relief. Dorothy is of sound mind and body. Dennis said. He said it lightly, but there was nothing light about it. Gerald kept his eyes on me. Mom, what do you say? Let us help. I set down my coffee cup. The table had gone very quiet. Iris was looking between the adults with the particular alertness of a child who understands more than anyone realizes. Sam had stopped eating his pie. Gerald, I said, I want to tell you something about your father. He blinked, surprised by the turn. Warren was a private man. You know that. He didn't talk about money at the dinner table. He didn't brag. He didn't make other people feel small to make himself feel larger. That was who he was. I paused, but there's something he did that I don't think you know about. I had asked Paul to come to Thanksgiving dinner. He'd declined warmly, saying this was a family matter and I was more than capable of handling it myself. But he'd given me everything I needed. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and placed 2 envelopes on the table. One was the codicil Paul had given me. The other was Warren's note. Before your father died, I said, he worked with Paul Whitmore to add a codicil to his will. You might want to hear what it says. I slid the legal envelope toward Gerald. He opened it slowly, Sylvia reading over his shoulder. I watched his face as he read. I watched it go from cautious to confused to something that passed very quickly through disbelief before landing in a pale, tight stillness. Any family member who publicly humiliates Dorothy, I said, so those who hadn't read it could understand, or who attempts to control her assets without her fully informed consent, or who takes actions designed to remove her from her home against her wishes. Forfeits their entire inheritance from Warren's estate. I let that settle. Paul has been documenting the birthday dinner, the menu card, the limited power of attorney you obtained without fully explaining what you were asking me to sign. The senior living tour you conducted on my behalf without asking me. And tonight. Gerald put the paper down. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, how long have you known? Since I walked into Paul's office and asked him to tell me the truth. You went to Paul without telling me? I went to my late husband's attorney to understand my own estate. Gerald, yes. Sylvia reached for Gerald's arm. He shook her off with a small, sharp motion. We were trying to help, he said, but the conviction had left his voice. It sounded like a habit rather than a belief. I know you told yourself that, I said. I've spent a lot of time trying to understand how you got here. And I think you did tell yourself that, at least in the beginning. But somewhere it shifted. I became a resource to you. A line item. And I let it happen. Because I was lonely and I was grieving and I needed to believe that my family was intact. Carol was crying quietly. Tyler was staring at the table. I'm not cutting you out of my life. I said, you're my son. But I am enforcing the codicil. Your share of your father's estate, as things stand, is forfeit. That's not a punishment. That's a consequence. And it's what your father chose. He never would have, Gerald started. He did. I picked up the second envelope, the smaller one, and slid it to Gerald. Read it. Gerald opened it. Read Warren's 4 sentences. Set it down. The table was very, very quiet. So that's it? Gerald said at last. You've decided? I've decided to be the person your father married. I should have done it sooner. I looked around the table, at Carol, at Dennis, at Tyler, at Iris and Sam who were watching with wide, serious eyes. Now, can we please have more pie? It was Carol who broke the silence first, standing up to reach the pie and asking Sam if he wanted more whipped cream. And the child's immediate and enthusiastic yes did something to ease the terrible tension that had been sitting over the table. Sylvia excused herself. Gerald sat for a long time before he, too, left the room. Later, when the children were watching a movie and Dennis was helping Tyler with the dishes, Carol sat beside me in the living room. And we talked for 2 hours in the way we hadn't talked since Warren's funeral. About what I'd been going through. About what she'd noticed from 3,000 miles away and had told herself was probably nothing. About our mother, who had done the same thing for different reasons, made herself small so the people around her could be comfortable. You're not doing that anymore, Carol said. No, I agreed, I'm not. The following spring was the most fully I had inhabited my own life in years. I joined a watercolor class at the Asheville Art Museum. Not the beginner session. Because I had been painting quietly in my sunroom all winter and I wasn't a beginner anymore. I went to Portland for 10 days in April and spent every possible moment with Carol's family. Learning that Iris had inherited Warren's mathematical mind and that Sam made everyone laugh in the same way Warren had. Unexpectedly and without effort. Paul and I met regularly. The estate was being restructured according to Warren's actual intentions. Tyler, who had grown into the kind of young man who visits his grandmother for no reason, was the primary inheritor of the redistributed portion. We'd talked about what he might do with it. He was thinking about graduate school. He was thinking about something that would help people. He wasn't sure yet, and I told him that not being sure yet was one of the most honest things a 19-year-old could say. Gerald and Sylvia moved to Raleigh, where Gerald had taken a position with a former associate. We exchanged brief emails, Christmas cards. I didn't know if we would ever find our way back to something real. And I had made a certain peace with not knowing. One afternoon in May, I was in the back garden. The beds fully recovered now. The roses back and better than they'd ever been, when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Hargrove? This is Eleanor Voss. I'm a curator at the River Arts District Gallery. We received one of your watercolors from the museum's spring showcase. We'd love to discuss a small showing. I sat down on the garden bench. I'm sorry, I said. A showing? 4 to 6 pieces. In our September rotation. Your work is extraordinary. We particularly loved the one titled 43 Years, asterisk. 43 Years was the painting I'd made last November. It was the view from Warren's side of the bed, the window, the maple tree, the morning light. I had painted it on a day when missing him felt like a physical weight. And then I had put it in the show because Warren had always told me that the things you make on the hardest days are the most true. Yes, I said, into the phone. I'd love that. I sat in the garden for a while after I hung up. The roses were coming in red and pale yellow. The colors Warren had always liked best. The afternoon light was doing what it does in Asheville in May. That particular golden slant that makes everything look like it's being seen for the first time. I thought about Warren writing that note. Dorothy, you always did know when to be patient. Take whatever time you need. I'm not going anywhere. He had known me better than I had known myself. For a while, but I was catching up. I went inside, put the kettle on, and called Carol to tell her about the gallery. She screamed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. And I laughed, the real kind. The kind that starts in your chest, for what felt like the first time in a very long time. This is my life now. Not the one I expected. Not the one I would have chosen. But mine, fully, finally. Mine. And if you're sitting somewhere right now feeling invisible in your own story, I want you to know, the page isn't finished. Not even close.